And we say, what's going on, everybody? It is Christian Ballard here at the Voice of College Football, Mississippi State Live, edition 12. We're still young. We got Andrew Miller
13.
here
By the way, not to cut
alongside.
you off, we're up to 13.
Are we at 13? That
We
is
are.
my fault. Hold on. I'm changing that right now.
We already changed it.
I am.
I caught it already.
Oh, okay, good, good. Yeah, I must have put 12. Anyway, we're up to 13, so we're a teenager show now, I guess. But um it's game week, Andrew. Southern Miss taking on the Bulldogs, a battle of two in-state teams. I guess I'm going to be honest. Looking into this week's game, I didn't really think to go back in history. What do you know about this game as far as like its history? Like, did this used to be like a big rivalry and everything, or like have they only met a handful of times?
It's a series that it's been played quite frequently. They used to play very regularly decades ago. Um,
Mhm.
and for a long time, it was a very competitive series, honestly. Frankly, a lot of that was Mississippi State not being that great of a team, but some of it is also credit to Southern Miss. For those who don't know, there was a time where Southern Miss football was a very strong program. And, there were plenty of years, not even just compared to state, compared to Ole Miss as well, where Southern was the best program within the state. They had years where they were legitimately good, and it was because it was a time where the SEC financially was not in a position relative to these other conferences, which Southern Miss for a long time was an independent, so they weren't even in a conference for many, many years. But
Right.
the SEC did not have the same financial stranglehold on the sport that it does now. So schools like State and Ole Miss did not have the same financial advantage that they did over Southern Miss. They didn't have the same advantage in terms of fan support. And it was also an era, recruiting wise, there's a whole lot of good talent in Southern Mississippi and across the Gulf Coast that for many years, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and other SEC schools were not necessarily tapping into. Southern Miss got a lot of those guys to come to campus. And there's a lot of USM players over the years that are guys that realistically in today's world would have been, 4-star prospects, would have been guys with a bunch of SEC offers that at that time Southern was the only school to really know about them. So Southern was able to land that type of talent, and they won a lot of games. And they developed a reputation for going on the road and taking down big time programs. They beat Alabama on a few occasions. They beat Florida State. They
Yeah.
beat Auburn. They had wins like that in their history. Things started to change eventually, and look, Mississippi State went a long time without playing them. I think they played in 1990, and then I don't think they played again until 2014. Southern, being a strong program, though, kind of continued all throughout the 2000s into the early 2010s. They had 2011, they won 11 games, won the Conference USA. Then things kind of took a quick, hard turn for that program. Um, they really fell on hard times, and since that point have not come back close to kind of where they expected. They've had a few bowl teams in the years since. I think they had a 9-win season, I think in 2015. But if you look at Southern Miss, like since their last big season in 2011, when they were they
Mhm.
were an 11-win team that year and won Conference USA. I think actually a 12-win team under Larry Fedora. Since that point, it's mostly been losing years for the Golden Eagles. And the most recent stretch obviously was really rough. You're also looking in that stretch, Mississippi State becoming significantly better. State football having a lot of good years in the seasons that followed. Maybe not last year. That last year's a little bit different, but overall, for where the programs have been over the past 15 years, you've seen Mississippi State kind of reach its ceiling as a program, where Southern Miss has kind of fallen off completely. And I talked about, for a long time, you didn't have that financial advantage. Well, we see the money SEC programs are bringing in these days. So it's quite different in terms of the finances, in terms of fan support, in terms of recruiting. As I mentioned, this is a team that for a long time Southern Miss built their program on the backs of really good players that the big time schools just were not aware of. Well,
Yeah.
today those guys don't fly under the radar. Everybody recruits everybody. Everybody can find anybody they want to. So there's a lot of players that Southern used to be able to get that State or Ole Miss didn't get, that now State and Ole Miss are consistently landing. Essentially what it's done is it's created a pretty big valley between the programs and what they're capable of being. And it's if you look at the all-time series record, you would say, wow, this has been, two programs very close to each other. But since the series was brought back in 2014, 2014 blowout win for Mississippi State. 2015, State goes down to Hattiesburg, and it was an ugly first half, and Southern actually trailed. I was at that game. It was a 9 o'clock local time kickoff on a rainy night in Hattiesburg. And State trailed at halftime, and then in the second kind of woke up and pulled away. And they ended up winning that game fairly comfortably. 2019, blowout win. 2023, kind of an ugly game, but State still wins comfortably. So they've played 4 times since bringing the series back, and it's all been double-digit victories, multiple score games for Mississippi State getting the wins. The programs have just gone in very different directions. Because of that, you go into this game, and it kind of creates a little bit of a different expectation for the Bulldogs for week 1 in terms of what you should see on the field when these teams face each other. And obviously, we're going to talk about that later in the show as we break down the Golden Eagles and break down what to expect from the Bulldogs. But yeah, look, it's a series with a lot of history, but the all-time history is not reflective of where these programs are at right now. And again, I recognize State's coming off a 2-10 season, but overall, with where the programs have been in the modern era and what the programs are capable of in the modern era, it's not the way it once was, is what I'll say.
Yeah, I like looking at this Winsipedia. Have you ever checked that out? I don't know if it's 100% accurate, and it probably is, but at least 99.9, I'm sure, because all of Alabama's rivals are definitely up to date. But I look at this, and it is interesting seeing all the numbers here. You talk about this matchup. Mississippi State leads the series on a win streak of 6, but dating back to 1989, and like we kind of mentioned already, that they met a couple years ago in 2023, but Mississippi State leads it all time 18, 12, and 1. That's pretty close to have if you're an SEC team playing a group of 5 school like Southern Miss. Not to say anything bad about them, nothing but nothing but respect. Let's be fair. But
you can have the respect
at the same
but
yeah, no, but at the same time, it's like one of those things like Southern Miss has had some killer teams in their program's history that don't get talked about too much, I don't think.
Yeah, look, there were a lot of years in the 80s and especially the early 90s where this was a program that, again, they were a giant killer in the sport. They would play anybody, and they would find ways to go win those games. And, one example, 1980, that's going way back, but the 1980 Mississippi State team is one of the best in school history. They won 9 games. They snapped a 28-game losing streak to Alabama and snapped it was a 28-game winning streak for Alabama. And Bama also had a long streak in the series. But Alabama was the 2-time defending national champion under Bear Bryant and had won like 28 games in a row. And that Mississippi State team beat them 6-3 in Jackson. They beat LSU. They won the Egg Bowl. I think they lost to Florida, who ended up winning the SEC, I believe. But that was a really good Mississippi State team. And what prevented them from winning 10 games is Southern Miss blew them out. Randomly, a very good State team in 1980 got blown out by Southern Miss. Again, that was a program that for many years was absolutely respectable. And you can go back as recently as the 2000s and talk about Southern as being the best team in the state. 2011, they were an 11-win team when Ole Miss was 2-10 and Mississippi State was 7-6. Now, Mississippi State, even as a 7-6 SEC team in that era, may have still ended up actually being a little bit better. But you get the point. There were many years where they were the only team in the state going to bowl games, or they were the only team in the state having winning seasons. So definitely there is that. You look back on the program and they've had their moments, but as I kind of talked about with where the sport has trended over the last 15 years, it's just different. And realistically, State should be in a better place. Whether or not they're in a better place going into this game is kind of debatable, given all that is transpired with the two teams over the last offseason. Obviously, Mississippi State doing a lot to improve themselves, but Southern Miss as well with a new head coach and a lot of new pieces. As again, we're going to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, look, it's an interesting series. I'm iffy on it personally as a fan because on the one hand, I understand like there is value in playing your in-state opponents, and I also
Mhm.
understand, to an extent, going on the road for the sake of, you got people within your state who are state fans. I'm an hour away from Hattiesburg. I'm 4 hours away from Starkville. Theoretically, I could attend this game much easier than I could a game in Starkville. So there are people who they like to have the benefit of the closer game. And look, a lot of people will just argue that it's a good thing for programs within the state that you're playing each other regularly and going around home, going to other locations. I can't say I'm particularly keen on playing on the road against a G5 team, just because I feel like you're just setting yourself up. This is one of those games where, look, I mean, we'll talk about this more as the episode goes along, but one of the themes of this game is like it is that state has to handle business. And historically, would you look at taking a loss to Southern Miss as a bad sign for the program for Mississippi State? No. For this year, it would be. And that's why you kind of talk about why would you put yourself in a situation where you're going on the road to play a game like this when the result either means nothing for you or it's terrible. There is no positive for state when you're winning this game. It's I don't know how I feel about all that, but look, I get it. It's a series that state plays them, Ole Miss refuses to. So I guess you give credit to state for being willing to actually play them. The other team in the state won't do it. But yeah, it's a lot of history between the two sides. But again, it's very different these days than it once was.
It is, especially with, you know, the fact that Mississippi State's coming off one of their worst seasons in history at 2-10. It is interesting though. Marshall head coach Charles Huff comes to Southern Miss to basically take over the same role, to take over as head coach. They went, or Southern Miss, I should say, not to get confused with Marshall here, but 1-11 last season. Both of these teams here in week one this weekend have a lot to play for outside of it being a historic type of rivalry. I mean, this could really help get a jump start on 2025.
100%. This is a huge game for both sides. From a Mississippi State perspective, I talked about a few weeks back, it's a top 5 most important game for MSU.
Mhm.
Because and I know the Thunder and Lightning guys, so Robbie Falk and Brian Haydad with Sports Talk Mississippi, they did this on their show today, talking about that this is the biggest season opener state has had in many years. And there's been a lot of seasons where state playing Southern Miss to open up the year, including on the road, you wouldn't really bat your eye at. That game's sort of just whatever. Given where the program is at for the Bulldogs, though, this game matters significantly. You have to
Yes.
go out and put together a performance that's going to get your fan base bought into where the program is at, because a lot of fans are not bought in right now. And when you add the fact that it's an in-state opponent, and you add the whole big brother versus little brother aspect to it and all of that goes into the game, it puts all the more pressure on Mississippi State that they go in and they don't just find a way to win. You need to win decisively and look like the much better team. From Southern Miss's perspective, they couldn't have a bigger opportunity in front of them, that they are getting game one for their new head coach that they are so fired up about, and a new roster, bringing in a lot of pieces from a team that, again, won 10 games and won the Sun Belt a year ago. They were 1-11 last year, but the roster they have brought in, a lot of those guys were just a part of a conference championship winning team, including the quarterback. And you've got a conference championship winning head coach. So there's a lot of excitement around that program, and they get to kick off his tenure with an in-state SEC opponent coming to town. And I'm sure it's going to be a big crowd. I don't think it's going to be the same crowd they had in 2015 when they hosted state. It sounds like there's a lot more tickets available than there were for that game. It's a 11 o'clock kick. It's not supposed to be crazy hot. It does look like we're getting this little cool down here at the end of August, but I know there is a chance for some rain over the weekend, just as we take an early look. So that might impact things a little bit. But look, they're going to be fired up because, look, if they lose, and if they lose by a lot, does that mean anything for them tenure in Charles Huff's tenure going forward? No. But if they win this game, that is absolutely massive, not just for what they can do this year, but in terms of setting a foundation for his program going forward. It's a game that they are going to go all out, I would have to think, to make a statement right away to kick off Charles Huff's tenure. It's a really big deal. And if you're Mississippi State, you've got to be able to handle that. You've got to make sure that you're the one who is able to go in and just sort of set the tone and not let them take advantage of the fact that, hey, we're playing at home. We're going to have the crowd behind us. This is a really significant game for Mississippi State.
It's very significant for Mississippi State, and also you can make a case it's very significant for Southern Miss. As we mentioned, the history between the teams and everything. What do you say we go ahead and dive into Southern Miss as a team? You look at let's start with their offense. What I read, only Kent State was worse at converting on third down chances last season. Very few teams turned the ball over more than Southern Miss did, and no one allowed more tackles for loss. I mean, I'm talking this was probably as low as it could get for offense last year. And on both sides of the ball, they have lost a lot of key pieces. I believe they've even lost some coordinators and stuff, but it's very interesting to see that they're also going to have a new quarterback in Braylon Braxton, which I don't really know too much about him, but he's coming in to replace Tate Rodemaker, who was a FSU transfer quarterback, interestingly enough. So, there's a lot of, I think from Southern Miss's perspective, there's a lot of hype and expectation for what this offense could be, but it's still going to be very young and possibly having some key issues from last year that's going to hold them back from having their full potential right away in a game like this.
It's possible. Shout out to Jay Xavier. Shout out to T. Watley. T. Watley at Southern Super Bowl, basically. Yeah, no, it is. This is, the Super Bowl thing. People get fired up over, and every single game of Super Bowl. I know Mississippi State fans in basketball kind of had to fight that fight. We were everybody's Super Bowl all throughout the year. For Southern Miss, this is the biggest opportunity they can have, and that's not necessarily even an insult. Like, this is a game where they get a chance to do something that they normally don't get to. It's definitely a huge deal. You talk about the Southern Miss offense, and we can dive into this. Braylon Braxton coming over from Marshall, he's an exciting player. He is a guy that last year for the Thundering Herd, once he took over as the full-time starter, ended up having a really nice year for them. On the season, about 1,600 pass yards, 19 touchdowns, just 2 picks, 60% completion percentage, just under 8 yards an attempt. Also added 610 yards on the ground and 4 rushing touchdowns. He's a very productive player. He's got a nice arm. He can push the ball downfield and can deliver accurate passes. He's a good playmaker with his legs, which is something State's going to have to contend with. And that's the type of guy that can elevate a team that's could have some question marks. I think they do have questions about who their top guys are going to be skill talent-wise. I think they've got some interesting skill players, as we'll get into here just in a sec. But there are questions about who the top guys are going to be. But they have a quarterback they feel they can trust. They've got questions about offensive line, which is going to be impacting significantly. But they have a quarterback they think they can trust. So bringing him over as that's the focal point of everything they're going to be doing this season, there's a lot of key guys from that Marshall team a year ago that are not back or that did not make the trip over. But if you were going to have one guy, having Braylon Braxton was huge, and he's going to be a big-time playmaker. And look, this is a Southern Miss offense that I mentioned some of the skill talent. Jeff Pittman, former Mississippi State running back, is a guy that could factor in. I think he's a talented player. Matt Jones also transferred in from Ole Miss. They think they've got some good running backs they can work with. Carl Chester at wide receiver is a Marshall transfer. They've got a few Marshall transfers at receiver, all of whom are going to play. But last year, he was a big play receiver and kind of a bigger body guy. Kyron Heath at tight end is a guy they're really excited about, and they think could be a really dangerous pass catcher for them over the middle of the field. I think they've got some talented backs. They have a tight end that they can get involved in the passing game. And if you've got having a receiving tight end It compared with, and this is not my own analysis. Shout out to Ian Boyd of America's War Game, who does really great work doing X's and O's stuff, something he talks about a lot. If you have a dual threat quarterback and you compare him with a receiving threat at tight end, that does a lot for your offense, because you've got a quarterback who doesn't need the same blocking up front to make things happen in the run game. And then you can have another weapon at the tight end position who can be a mismatch player. Braylon Braxton's a guy who can sort of maximize that and make that happen. I talk about Carl Chester at receiver, but he's not the only one. They've got some other guys they feel really good about. And I'm looking at my Phil Steele right now because I didn't have it all pulled up in front of me. But like Micah Davis and Elijah Metcalf, those are guys that they think are going to be able to be some big play receivers for them. They got some nice bodies on the outside, like guys who can go up and win one-on-one balls. And I think that's going to be a big part of what they want to do offensively. Because when you talk about this offense in terms of what Blake Anderson at OC is going to do, I think it's going to look pretty similar to what Mississippi State wants to run. So Blake Anderson's background, and he was at Southern Miss previously. He was the OC under Larry Fedora back when they had all that success. For a while, he was more kind of in that pass-happy spread offense vein, sort of air raid-esque, but not full-on air raid. And that's sort of a big part of what they did. But over the years, I think he evolved some. And when he got to Utah State, he hired a current Mississippi State assistant, Anthony Tucker. State's running backs coach was hired to be his offensive coordinator at Utah State. Anthony Tucker had been with Jeff Levy and Josh Heupel at UCF, running the offense that we see Tennessee run and now State runs a version of as well. He took that system and installed it at Utah State. So Utah State, the last few years while Blake Anderson was there as head coach, they were a Briles offense team or a veer and shoot team. That's what they were doing offensively. And I think Blake Anderson, it sounds like, is bringing a lot of that. Now, he was not coaching last year, and he was also not the play caller at Utah State when he was there. It sounds like, though, that's kind of the offense he's bringing to Marshall. He's bringing a lot of the stuff that State runs, which for a State defense perspective, that means you're facing something that you see a lot in practice. But you're going to see they're talked a lot about tempo. Like they are going to play fast and try to run as many plays as they can. Very similar to Mississippi State. They're probably going to use some wide splits with the receivers and get guys out close to the sidelines. Very similar to Mississippi State. You're going to see a downhill run game, similar to Mississippi State, and you're going to see those vertical shots down the field and some heavy dosage of RPO. Those are things. Again, this is the same offense Mississippi State's running. So if you're State, you're kind of getting used to it now. Obviously, it's a little different when you add a quarterback in Braylon Braxton who has the ability to make plays with his legs like he does. Dealing with that becomes a little bit of a different story and sort of adds another dimension to what this offense is able to be. But it's a system that I think if you're State, you got some familiarity with. But again, I think they've got a quarterback who can play well in it. I think they've got some good running backs. I think they got the receivers who can win one-on-one down the field, which is a big part of being able to run this system. The big question for them is offensive line. They're looking at breaking in 5 new starters up front, basically an entire transfer class. And it sounds like, reading some comments from Charles Huff, that he hasn't been fully committal on O-line being in great shape to this point, and how settled that unit is. That's one of those things. If you're Mississippi State, you have to feel like you have a matchup you can take advantage of. If they've got questions up front, and I know State's got questions along the defensive line, but you would think SEC guys can make a bigger impact up front than Southern is able to with their offensive line. You feel like you should be able to have the edge there. Now, again, Braxton's the type of quarterback that can make plays with his legs. So you have to be able to account for that. So even if the protection isn't there, he can maybe make something happen. You also have to account for the fact that, hey, you have questions at corner, and your corner's being able to hold up one-on-one. If they're going to send those vertical shots to your receivers, even if the pass protection is not great, is Braxton able to get those passes off, and are those guys able to get by your corners on the outside? Those are going to be big questions for the State defense in this. And I think it's an interesting matchup. I think this Southern Miss offense that can be dangerous and can present some problems, but I hope you would have to hope that State's advantage in the trenches will be enough for them.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it's kind of like two sides of a coin. It's like, on one hand, you have what should be an amped up and ready to go defense for Mississippi State. and you have what should also be an improved Southern Miss offense, and they're going to have to face each other obviously on the field. And it's you would think that um, hopefully for Mississippi State they have the defensive advantage, and they can make big plays in the secondary, get good pressure up front. They have the guys to do it, and with that being said, I mean, we definitely need to talk about, this opponent and defense for Southern Miss too. The question is it similar or anywhere near what State's going to have on the field?
Yeah, Southern Miss defensively is going to be a little bit interesting. So they Marshall Charles Huff, coming from Marshall, brings his defensive coordinator with him. Um, that being Jason Seymour, who last was the DC at Marshall over the last 2 seasons. And they were a good unit, one of the better scoring defenses within the Sun Belt. One of the better defenses in terms of generating pressure. I think they were top in red zone defense, very good on third downs, forced a good bit of turnovers. Gave up yards. They were a team that they would give up some yards, but they could kind of capitalize on big plays and capitalize on getting stops in the red zone. Which a big part of that was they had a terror off the edge in Mike Green as a pass rusher who is now with the Baltimore Ravens. So, that's the type of talent that they don't have. But they brought over some good pieces from that Marshall defense from last season. And look, it's going to be a very different looking Southern Miss defense than we saw a year ago. It's going to be almost an entirely new unit outside of a couple pieces. And they're probably going to be due for some major defensive improvement. You look at some of the guys who are stepping in for them. The big name that transfers over is Josh Monton at corner. 5 interceptions a year ago for Marshall. That's a guy who was a big time target in the portal. That's a guy Mississippi State wanted, and he ended up following his coach to Southern Miss. And that's a guy who's a big time corner for them. They feel good about the secondary as a whole. Nickelback Ian Foster, 48 tackles last year, 5 TFLs, 4 passes broken up. That's another guy that they feel really good about there in that secondary. That's expected to be the strength of this team, is they're going to have talented pieces on the back end, which will likely help them out in terms of being able to go and generate pressure. I think a big part of what Seymour wants to do as DC is to be attacking. If you watch his teams at Marshall, it's not necessarily that they were blitzing constantly. They didn't have to because of when you got a guy like Mike Green at defensive end and someone who can win like that, you don't have to blitz constantly when you got a guy who can generate that pressure like by himself. You got quality pieces on the Marshall defensive side, 100%. And those guys stepping in for Southern Miss are going to be guys who are impact players. But he does like to bring pressure some. He likes to change up where that pressure is coming from. So you present one look to the quarterback and then change up where the pressure comes from. And you do a lot of that stuff up front. One, because you're trying to mess with the defense, mess with the offense, obviously, and get after the quarterback. But two, you do it when you trust your secondary and you trust that, hey, my guys can hold up in coverage long enough for our pressure to get home. And I think they feel pretty good about the pieces they have in the secondary this year. And even though I don't know if Southern Miss has a guy up front like Mike Green for Marshall a year ago, they've got some guys they feel pretty good about. Berdarius Lewis at defensive tackle is a piece that they have coming back that they like a lot, who had 4 sacks a season ago. Jabari Ishmael is a transfer from Marshall at defensive end that they think is going to be a really nice player for them, who can provide some of that pass rush off the edge. You got a couple linebackers, and Chris Jones, who was probably the best player on their team a year ago, coming back, and Michael Montgomery, a transfer from Portland State, who was a really good player. So there's some talented pieces there in that front seven. But I think, again, they feel strongest about what they have on the back end of the defense, and that's going to let them be an attacking group up front. I will point out, though, and this is where it makes sense that they would want to be attacking. We don't have a ton of size along the defensive line. We don't have a depth chart from Southern Miss. They actually are not releasing one this week. That was put out today, that they're not going to put one out, which, of course, that seems very typical for them. Why on earth would we release a depth chart to let Mississippi State know who's going to be playing? But if you look at a lot of the guys they have at defensive line that are expected to step in, you're not talking about a bunch of guys who are 320 pounds out there. It's a lot of guys who are in that 270, 280 type range, if not less. Now, you can have guys that size that are still very talented players. You have guys like that who can be great pass rushers, be good disruptors. And if you create enough havoc up front with changing where pressure is coming from and doing some stuff with your stunts up front and your twists up front, those are ways that you can create pressure even without having a big dominant force who's just going to, muscle his way past an offensive lineman. And that is sort of going to be a little bit of the MO of what they want to do defensively. That said, you feel like State should have a physical edge against Marshall, and you feel like they should be able to find some success on the ground, which brings me to an interesting point when you talk about more. I think I kept saying Marshall against Southern Miss. When you talk about State, it's basically Marshall's defense, though. That's essentially what we're talking about here. But when you talk about State being able to have success and maybe do so on the ground, what I look to the last 2 years at Marshall, when Seymour was defensive coordinator, he has seen this offense. He saw it 2 years in a row because Old Dominion, who Marshall played, runs this offense. Well, in those 2 games, in 2023, Old Dominion scored 35 points, 434 yards at over 8 yards a play. They had 339 rushing yards and almost 11 yards per carry. 2024, 35 points, 517 yards at 6.7 yards per play, 286 rushing yards at 6.2 yards per carry. They got gashed on the ground, a rushing average of 312.5 yards per game rushing. When facing this offense, the Marshall's DC gave up over 300 yards a game on the ground. Now, Marshall won those games mostly because their offense put up 40 points. If you score 35, man, you should feel pretty good. But obviously, sometimes you got to be able to win a shootout, and Old Dominion couldn't do enough. There are also some turnovers in those games. Neither game, Marshall was able to throw the ball. Old Dominion was able to throw the ball particularly well on third down, and that really came back to bite them. If they got in the third and long, they ran into some trouble. But when they were able to just not make mistakes, they killed them running the football. Now, yikes. Yeah, that's the correct way to put it. You're talking about 300 yards a game on the ground. I'm not saying Mississippi State's going to run for 300 yards in this game. I don't know. But what I do know is the track record for Southern's DC in defending this system, albeit in a pair of wins, but the track record for him stopping this system has not been great, particularly in rush defense. And also, for what it's worth, Marshall last season, rush defense as a whole, was not very good. They got away with it. They found ways to get stops in the red zone. They found ways to force turnovers. They were able to make it all work. But rush defense was a little bit of an issue for them, especially going up against this offense. And we think Mississippi State, with the guys they have on the offensive line, the size they brought in there, with the talent they have at running back, I think they're going to want to be able to run the football. And I'm not saying they're going to go and just line up and just hand the ball off willy-nilly, like no matter what, we'll just always run the ball. But I think if they get looks to run the football, they're going to want to go and impose their will, and I think they probably will get those looks. Now, it will be a question, if Southern likes their secondary, can State's receivers test those guys when you get those play-action chances? That'll be a question for you. Can your pass protection hold up? If you do go sit back and throw. You're wondering about that. But again, Southern does not have a single pass rusher I look at and say, man, that guy is terrifying right now.
Yeah.
I think if you're State, if you can stay ahead of the chains and you can run the ball well on them, you should have an edge here. I think this is a defense, even with some talented pieces, I think State's got to have a chance to take advantage.
Absolutely. Really talented pieces for Southern Miss. And one guy that stands out to me, at least in terms of some numbers he had last year, and he seems to be, first off, he's a senior, and maybe you mentioned him, I'm not sure, but Brodarius Lewis is a senior. He's 6'2", 295, had 4 sacks last year, was able to get after the quarterback, was able to stop guys in the backfield. One of the key anchors of that defensive line with 19 tackles on his own last year. Big guys like that for Southern Miss. They're not that team that could just pull out the 300-pound guys, but they can still make the 290, 295 work. And guys like this are kind of proof of that. And those are going to be the guys that I think Shapen and company on offense have to be careful about when they go up against this team this week.
T. Watley pointed out with Albert Reese at left tackle, they don't have to be too terrifying. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute because State did release the depth
Yeah.
chart. We want to get into that and just give our reaction. We'll get that before we get into breaking down Mississippi State's matchup here. But, yeah, look, I think Southern Miss, this defense has some talented pieces for sure. They're going to be better. You got Josh Munn at quarter's a good player. You talked about Lewis up front. He's a good guy. They got some talent at linebacker. And something I heard listening to Scott Watkins, who covers Southern Miss for Sun Herald, he talked about, they think the frontline guys, it should be a really good unit. The question will be depth. And I think if you're Mississippi State, that's another thing, can you look, we're probably talking about a high possession game. Southern wants to push tempo. We know Mississippi State wants to be able to push tempo as well. If you have to get into depth, who has the edge? And you feel like Mississippi State should have the edge both offensively and defensively in terms of getting into depth. But we talked about it a lot with State's defensive line, or it's been the topic of the offseason, is they think they can rotate bodies up front. They think they can rotate bodies at linebacker. I don't know if Southern's able to yet at those positions. And if you're State, you feel like you got a chance to wear them down. Should their wins come with some asterisk regarding the opponents they have played last season, depth chart comparison, State is a better team on paper. Look, State absolutely has the better team on paper. I'm not going to question that at all. But look, there is some talent on that Marshall team that's now in Hattiesburg. I keep calling them Marshall because they're basically Marshall. There's legit talent there, though, that is now in Hattiesburg. But like Braylon Braxton is a good player. Josh Monson is a very good player. And some of the receivers, I think, are talented guys who are going to be able to be impactful. There's a few other pieces they added on defense who are solid guys. This is a group that is going to be much improved for sure. There's no doubt about it. It's just a matter of, depth-wise, I don't think they're there. And something I just talked about that with the depth in terms of being able to wear them down. Something I just keep thinking back to is we talk about the offensive and defensive lines. And I can't say this for State's defensive line for a year ago, but going into last season, State's offensive line, the feeling a lot of us had was, well, we're worried about the depth, but we think they brought in 5 good pieces at transfers who can come in and start for them. We think they're going to have a solid starting 5 along the offensive line with the transfers that they added. And it didn't happen. That offensive line didn't work out because the pieces that came in just didn't come together the way you want them to. I'm hearing similar things with Southern Miss in that, well, we like the 5 guys we brought in up front. We like the guys we brought in along the defensive line. And it's like, okay, but they're worried about depth. How certain, though, are you that those starting guys are actually going to pan out? How certain are you that your starting offensive line is going to come together? How certain are you that your starting defensive line is going to come together? Because, hey, Mississippi State, we've been there, done that. We've seen it, and that's tough to overhaul in an offseason if you don't already have a foundation in place of solid guys you can lean on. We now go into year 2 for Mississippi State, and we talk about State's offensive line, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of transfers here, but they've also got some guys they've worked with. They've got guys who have played. They know what they have. They have some solid pieces there. State's defensive line, it's tough to say there's a lot of solid pieces there, but it does sound like some guys have had some good off seasons of development. They got a lot more depth, and the talent in that room is improved. You feel like they've got a lot of guys that can play. I don't think Southern's there. And we'll talk about matchups later when we get into the predictions, but that is a key thing for me matchup-wise. The trenches, I do think State, both sides of the line of scrimmage, is going to have a big edge. And I think State's going to be able to wear them down physically. I do worry about some of the playmaking ability Southern has. I will be interested to see if State's able to test their secondary. They need to be able to. But those are big things to look at for sure.
Yeah, I think, and I'll probably reiterate this later when we do our picks and predictions here, but I would think that Mississippi State offensively is going to be that team, at least in this game, that just says we're not the best, but we're better than what this team's putting on the field defensively. Now, there's going to be some challenges, obviously, but I think it's one of those things like I'm trying to think of how I want to put this, but like can Southern Miss have that defense that can play some ball against Mississippi State? Sure, absolutely. The question is, can you keep up with them for 4 quarters and 60 minutes? I doubt that. And again, we'll talk about that when we predict the game and everything. But just to go ahead and throw that out there, how I feel, like I don't think Southern Miss is going to be a team that can wear you down defensively for 4 straight quarters. Maybe half a game, maybe an hour or a quarter and a half or something. But I don't see how they keep up even with the lower tier offense in the SEC like Mississippi State, and not to dog on Mississippi State, I'm not, but let's call it where they are right now. Even on a team like that, I think the big question for me for State's defense or for Southern Miss's defense is, can they keep up for a 4-quarter game? And I just don't think so.
Yeah, look, it's definitely fair. And I think that is the big matchup here to watch. Like, Southern Miss offensively has guys who can make plays, but can State with what they have up front on their defense get after them enough to limit them? I think they can. Southern Miss defensively has some talented pieces on that front line, but you talk about over the course of a 4-quarter game with all the tempo that's going to be run between these two teams, all the plays, it's very clear what State already has the physicality edge up front just based on the body types that are going to be there. State has a significant edge when you talk about depth. So when State's having to roll their second and third stringers out there against Southern Miss's offensive line, an O-line and for Southern Miss that has question marks, for that for sure. Like, State's gonna be able to take advantage, but also the Southern Miss defense against State's offensive line. You feel like State's got guys who should be able to impose their will a little bit, and if you can wear them down some, you can get after them. And of course, I mean, look, it doesn't just want to be a wear them down game. You want to hit those explosive plays down the field as well. And I think those chances will be there. But it does feel like this is a game where State's just going to have a pretty significant edge in the trenches, despite the talent on both sides of the ball for Southern Miss.
Yeah. College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click Join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
So what do you say, Andrew? We talk up the depth chart for Mississippi State, man. A lot of good players we've talked about this offseason. A lot of question marks here or there, but a depth chart was released, and it all starts on offense with Blake Shapen. Let's dive into it, man. I have read from the Clarion Ledger put this out that Blake Shapen is set to be the starting quarterback. They have a lot of different question marks, I think, in terms of who's going to be the backup quarterback. I mean, obviously it comes to Krummenhoek or Kamario Taylor, but then you get, not necessarily a question mark at the running back position, but it's like how I would put it. It's a 1-2 punch with Devon Booth and Fluff Bothwell, and then Johnny Daniels as third string. So, or second or 2.5, whatever you want to call it. All the guys we've talked about, we finally get to see in action this week. What have you heard specifically on the depth chart?
I don't know if I've heard anything, but just in terms of takeaways, I mean, obviously, look, we knew Shapen was going to be the guy at QB. That wasn't even a discussion. Now, the backup thing, it will be interesting. You would hope this is a game where you get to backup quarterback for a positive reason. Obviously, you don't want a situation where you're having to turn it over to a backup for a negative thing, but maybe we'll get a bit of an answer if State's up big in this thing in the fourth quarter. We get to see either Croman Hawk or Kamario Taylor. Maybe both of those guys get to play. That'd certainly be ideal. Offensively from a skill talent standpoint, nothing surprises me. You knew Devon Booth and Fluff Bothwell were the top of that room at running back. Brennan Thompson, Jordan Mosley, and Anthony Evans have all been talked about consistently as going to be the guys starting, at least to start off the year at receiver. So there's no sort of surprise there. Seydou Traore starting at tight end, you knew that. So from when it came to skill talent, skill talent and quarterback, we've known who the guys were going to be for quite some time now. The questions for State are really offensive line. And the move that was notable is that Albert Reese has been named starting left tackle. And that's interesting. We talked about on the last show that it sounded as though there was positive momentum in place for Timothy Lewis to come in and take that starting job as a redshirt freshman, which is something I thought would be a really positive development for the offensive line. If you're saying that a guy who has the highest athletic ceiling of that in that entire room is stepping in as a redshirt freshman and is able to grab that job, that gives me a lot of confidence that, okay, one, he is living up to his ceiling, and then two, it allows you to put other guys on the line in their key spots. Well, I don't know if what they were showing through camp, it just didn't translate, but clearly they feel they want to go with Timothy Lewis there. Now, not Timothy Lewis, with Albert Reese. On the one hand, it's understandable, right? He was a starter for you all throughout last season, primarily starting at right tackle. And he's the senior, veteran on that group. He's a redshirt senior. So he's in his 5th year in the program, returning starter. He's one of the team leaders. Makes all the sense in the world why you would want that guy as your left tackle, your most important position on the offensive line. The problem there is last year playing right tackle, he did not have a great season. He had issues, especially in pass protection. And he played better late in the year when they moved him inside to guard. And I think there was an expectation, because he was working some at guard this offseason, that's where we'll see him. So the fact they're putting him at left tackle, one, it makes me think, okay, they think they need him there, which means they don't think Timothy Lewis is ready. And then two, that just kind of does give me some concern, though, about that spot. Because here's the other thing. We could talk about offseason development for sure. He missed the spring. He was out injured during the spring. So there's a bunch of valuable reps he could have been getting that he didn't get to have. I worry some with him at left tackle. Now, Lebby was asked about it in his press conference and said, well, we're going to play multiple guys there. Okay. I know he's expressing it as a sign of, like, we're excited about the depth. The reality of the situation, or I shouldn't say the reality of this situation because I technically don't know. The reality of college football, there are very few teams that have multiple guys that they feel good about playing at left tackle. Very few teams. Even like big boys, even schools that you talk about as contenders. It's rare you've got multiple guys that if you said, we have to start him at left tackle, we're going to be in good shape. You can sometimes get your one. Now, maybe they genuinely think we have multiple guys who can play there. Maybe they've been blown away by what they've seen from Albert Reese. But it gives me some pause. It does worry me a little bit. And you talk about rotating bodies. Well, then you add in, you look at the rest of the offensive line. At left guard, Jacoby Jackson or Luke Work. Center, Cannon Boone or Brendan Smith. Right guard, Zach Owens or Trevor Mayberry. So we got three oars across the interior. Plus, we're talking about that at left tackle, we still don't know. We're still going to rotate bodies there. And again, you want to rotate offensive linemen. You're going to bring guys in and out for sure. That's a position where one guy's not going to play the entire game unless he absolutely has to. But all of these oars and all the talk about playing multiple guys at left tackle, to me, that says we still are not settled on 5 guys as our leading group. And when we talk about a position that cohesion matters so much, and getting those reps together and how, okay, I know how this guy is going to block in this situation. I know how I need to help him, or I know I don't need to help him. I can go take care of this. All of that matters when we talk about offensive line. And it worries me a little bit. Like I said the last show, I was getting my hopes up because I was like, hey, man, it sounds like Jimmy Lewis is coming and taking that job, which that mattered to me because, again, that means we're putting a highly athletic guy at left tackle and we're letting Albert Reese play guard where we have seen him perform better.
Right.
Now we don't know about that, and it gives me some questions about what that offensive line is going to be. Do we think it's a little bit of a nod to the older player that stuck it out and Lewis comes in and plays? Possibly. It could definitely be a thing of, hey, we're letting you be the guy to start off with. I also feel like, though, they could play him at guard. Now, and to be fair, Levy did say, guys are going to play, which suggests Percy Lewis is going to play. And I'll say this. I had a Matthew Watkins on Twitter pose this question to me today. Like, is it possible that they just feel because you've got all those question marks at guard or because you have more guys who can play along the interior, not necessarily question marks, but they have more guys that can play center and play guard than they feel good can play tackle, that they would like to put a guy that they know can play tackle and Albert Reese at tackle. That's fair, and that's probably a big part of why. Honestly, that is probably a pretty good answer as to why he's there. I just am of the opinion, though, like if I'm thinking who are my best five and put my five best out there and get them in all in position, I would hope that Jimothy Lewis is one of those five and that Albert Reese is sliding in as one of your guards. I don't know. So we'll have to see on that.
I think it is interesting, though, and Mississippi State's not the only team in this current situation as we approach week one. I mean, I'm sure Alabama and Auburn and all the other SEC teams are not set on, hey, these are our five guys on the offensive line. And I guess I forgot. I was going to ask something. I guess what I wanted to ask was like, I mean, in a way, is that a good thing to not completely have it figured out because you can experiment and kind of give guys like just kind of rotate. Plus, we talk about, I think there's so many tough positions in football, but being heavy guys like that on the O-line, sometimes you do need a break. Sometimes you do need a breather and need to just sit down for a play or two. And it kind of would be good, in my opinion, if State is one of those teams that doesn't try to wear out the starters like, hey, this is our set five, and unless they're hurt, they're going to play, or unless we're like up big in a game, which what are the chances that's going to happen every single week this year for State? So I think you need to have this mindset of these are who we're going to start out with and let them play a couple quarters. And then, even if it's going good, let them take a breather and don't be afraid to put other guys out there. Because like we talk about, man, size and depth for Mississippi State's O-line is very critical for this offense this year. And we see that they have that. Now it's time to put it on the field.
Look, depth and being able to rotate bodies is a big thing, and they will be able to. So from that standpoint, like, you're not wrong. Yes, having the options is a good thing. I just know that realistically, like, okay, they've got depth, they got options. Cool. What is more likely? Oh, man, there are so many talented players in this room that we just can't settle on five. Or, man, we really need five guys to show us they can be starting linemen, and they haven't done that yet. Because the reality in college football is it's typically the latter. It's typically we don't know that we got five guys we can really lean on. And, yeah, you're not just going to play five guys. You're going to rotate more than that. But you need to have your starting unit that you feel good about, where it's like, okay, if all these guys are healthy, fresh, ready to go, we got five guys up front that we can lean on. And I think the optimism is that Mississippi State going into this year was going to be able to find that, and they still might. And look, I should say, I'm having all this reaction. At the end of the day, do depth charts really matter? No. We see it all the time that these depth charts are completely pointless. Guys end up playing positions different than what they're listed at. Some guys will be listed as a starter while they're injured, and they'll never get taken off the depth chart because the coach is like, screw you, I'm not telling you who the guy is. They're the coaches who will do the or at literally every single name. Like, I'm not like, this guy is the starter, or this guy, or this guy, or this guy, and they'll go all the way down. Again, kind of just as like, well, I have to put out a depth chart, but I'm not telling you who's playing. It can all just be whatever. And also, as T. Watley pointed out a second ago, it could be given a nod. You could just be given a nod to older players, right? You could be highlighting guys of like, hey, man, you had a good camp, and we're going to reward you with a starting job, even if you may not be our true top guy. We do see that where someone might be a starter but may not be the guy who ends up playing the most. You know, it's a little different in football, but I'm just thinking of a basketball example. Mississippi State basketball last year, Michael Nwoko was Mississippi State's starting center for like 30 of the 34 games or however many they played. Keyshawn Murphy played significantly more minutes at center than Michael Nwoko did. Nwoko played like 15 minutes a game because he'd give him like 10 good minutes and then he'd be gassed the rest of the game. Keyshawn Murphy would come off the bench and was a double-digit scorer. And I hope he sucks at Auburn this year because, yeah, you have fun going there. And I don't have anything against Nwoko at LSU now, so I hope he sucks too. But, you know, it's basketball discussion. So maybe it could be a similar thing here. I'm not trying to take too much away from the depth chart, but I was hoping it would be a little bit more settled that we know we're rolling in. These are our 5 offensive linemen. We feel good about this. And, like, yes, we have good depth. We have guys who can play. We have guys who can rotate. But this is our starting unit, and we feel better about it. If we get to the other side of the ball, still kind of a lot of questions about who the starters are. Because if you look at the defense, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the 11 positions have an or for the starting position.
Yeah.
I'll say this. A couple things defensively. The big thing that I do want to address, a lot of questions and concerns from fans over the fact that State's transfers have not come in and taken over starting jobs. There's only one transfer who is locked in as a starter without the or designation, and that's Jere Bledsoe at nose tackle. And I'll talk about that in a second because I find that interesting. But guys like Will Whitson, guys like Jamil Burrows was actually lower on the depth chart, but like Will Whitson is not a locked-in starter. Jerron Manning is not a locked-in starter. You have Jalen Smith is actually listed as just as a backup, but Darian Gillette, not a locked-in starter. So you have a lot of these new pieces that are coming in, and they did not just come in and take over starting roles. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I know why people are concerned because the defense sucked a year ago. And if a bunch of the guys coming back are who are going to be your starters this year, do you feel good about that? What I'll say to that is, one, experience does matter on defense. As much as it is talent-driven, there is a point to be had that guys who are experienced and just know how to get into position do tend to perform better. Like there is something to be said that even if you're not the most talented, if you know where to arrive and can arrive at the right time, you can generally make enough plays to give yourself a chance.
Yeah.
And having guys who have been in this defense now for a year coming back does matter. So when we talk about players like a Brylan Lanier or a Hunter Washington on the back end potentially being starters, that may not be a disaster, right? That may not be the end of the world. Like, there's a good chance those guys are going to play better being in this defense for another season. The other part to that is a lot of the guys who came back, it sounds like they had good off seasons. I've heard good things about Deontay Anderson at defensive end. You know, I think there's been good things said about Nick Mitchell. So you look at some of these guys who are returning, and to me, it's not just a case of like, well, they were a part of a bad defense, so they don't need to be starting. I think some of them have earned a starting job, potentially, to step in this year. And look, defense, even look, they are going to rotate the bodies quite a bit. You know, I don't really the safety position I'm not worried about. Linebacker, I'm not worried about. Defensive line, I'm really not worried about. Like I think they're going to rotate bodies in all of those spots. Now, D-line, what did stick out, I mentioned Jere Bledsoe starting. I don't think anybody saw that coming. That was not a guy anyone had on their radar as a potential starter. The two guys he's ahead of, though, Jamil Burrows and Calvin Dinkins at nose tackle, those are two guys everybody was pretty excited about. So, and Burrows specifically is a guy that had a good offseason. So if Bledsoe is stepping in and is like, no, he is a starter, that gets me excited that he's going to play well for State there at that nose tackle spot. Now, I did not see Kedrick Bingley-Jones being the starter at defensive tackle. That really surprised me. Some of the guys that got at defensive end, whether it be a Will Whitson or Trevion Williams, I'm a little bit surprised they don't have them there. And they could move guys around, to be fair. But for what it's worth, I think this whole emphasis on getting bigger up front, Kedrick is 6'4", 320. Bledsoe is 6'4", 315. So I think some of it is they want that size along their two interior positions. That's a big part of it. Jack linebacker off the edge, Brandon Jennings or Malik Silla. That doesn't bother me because I think Brandon Jennings is expected to have a good year as one of your edge rushers. So I don't care that a transfer is not coming in immediately starting over him. If there is one position on defense, though, that I'm still worried about, for the same reasons I talked about with offensive line, it's corner. Because they have ors listed at both spots. It's Jet Jefferson or Diego Brumfield. It's Kelly Jones or Javen Williams. This is a team that going into the offseason, we said they've got to be able to address cornerback, especially once they lost their top guy in Bryce Pollock. They never addressed corner. They added a couple transfers that were questionable. They added a JUCO player in Jefferson that nobody got excited about, but seemingly had a really good offseason and sounds like had a very good camp to the point a lot of people thought he was going to be a starter. But Kelly Jones is a guy where it's a lot of potential overproduction. Diego Brumfield is a guy we just really haven't seen it from him. And when he was playing a lot, it was at Memphis as a part of a bad secondary. We're going into this year. It was a question, does State have one starting caliber corner? Again, we're now sitting here. We got 4 options going into week 1, and we haven't decided on who our top guys are. Now, like I said with offensive line, can we play the game of like, oh man, all 4 of those guys are outstanding, and we just can't sit here and say who's the guy is? Is that more likely? Or is it, we don't know if we have guys that we can trust? I am worried that it is the latter. And even in week 1, I think Southern's got some talent at wide receiver, and they got a quarterback who can push the ball downfield. I have questions about that. So, the defensive depth chart overall, okay, but I think they're going to be fine. There's a couple interesting things, but I don't react too much. Corner gets me. I just like to close off the depth chart, and obviously, I know I've been going on here. I'll let you get in your thoughts before we move on. But the 2 biggest question marks, I think, for Mississippi State this offseason were offensive line and corner. And I think going into week 1, we still feel like we have big questions about those spots. That does concern me.
Well, I mean, it is a big concern for me as well. I mean, you had all off season, you had the spring game, you had spring practice, you had fall camp, you had media day, you had all this time, and you still don't know. Now, if I'm hopeful for anything where it says or, you're hoping that it's just everyone's too good and we just can't decide who's the best of them all. But let's be honest, I don't think that's the case with Mississippi State. I'm not saying there's bad talent there or anything. There's pretty good, like, studs in the secondary. There's studs at linebacker. And it's only concerning, as you put it, Andrew, that they haven't figured it out because they've had this whole off season. And I would also say, before you know it, you're going to hit the tough spots of the schedule in SEC play. What are the chances they even have it figured out by mid-season or, middle of September even, just like as we kick off conference play? Like, if they don't get it figured out soon, it's going to be a long season for them like it was last year.
And look, it's week 1, right? They're going to have to work through some kinks. I'm not going to sit here and say that's not the case. I will say for offensive line, I feel good about Phil Lodeholt. I feel good that they will be better in that group. I feel really good that group will be better than they were a year ago. I don't feel really good that they're going to be good, but I feel really good that they are not going to be the same awful group that they were a season ago. Corner, I can't be confident yet. That I'm going to have to see it to believe it for that position group. any shot they're using this game as a tester for starting spots by rotating a lot of players. It's possible. What
I
worries
don't
me
see
is
why not. I mean, you would hope that's the case, but
you would hope, but at the same time, it's like, is Southern a team on the road you want to be doing that against? Last year's Southern Miss team, yes, but this is not the same Southern Miss team. Like,
right.
I think you could get yourself in trouble if you're just saying we're just going to rotate bodies the whole time. Or
Yeah.
they're going to rotate bodies, but I mean, like, all right, you get this series, you get this series. Like, instead of finding guys who you can trust to play, I feel like this is a game they needed to have, a starting 22 that they felt really good about. And there's a couple key spots I don't think they're locked in at. That is going to be a question. All right, so we'll talk about that Southern Miss game and to make our finalize our preview, make our predictions for week 1. Let's just go with, like, right off the bat, what is one thing you are looking for from the Mississippi State offense against Southern Miss this Saturday?
We talk about the bodies up front. We obviously want to see them get to a point this season where they can be very explosive. But I think I look at the run game, and I think I want to see it start there. I want to see them not be afraid to open it up, especially with Devon Booth. Like, let him go loose. Um, Not to spoil anything, I know we had talked before, Andrew, about, like, pick a player for the offense and the defense. My player for the offense, and again, I hate to jump too far ahead, but Devon Booth. We also got guys in the backfield like Fluff Bothwell or whoever too. I really want to see the run game. I want to see if they're able to attack. We talk about the bodies up front that can block for them. Offensively, I just want to see him move the football however it is, but I especially want to see if they could dominate the run game with how hyped up these running backs have been talked about, especially by us this offseason, I think.
I definitely think being physical up front is something you want to see. You want to see State week 1 against what should be an inferior opponent, a team where you should have the edge in the trenches, even with everything I just talked about with the offensive line and some of the concerns. You got more size up front. You've got more depth. You've got more experience. Can you be maulers up front? That's a big thing. And you definitely want to be able to run the ball at will when you choose to run the football in this game. Something I'm going to be looking forward to this offense. I want to see a receiver emerge on the outside. Here's a good point. I love to see the interior set the tone for the game. 100%. Look, you do want to be able to set the tone with your physicality up front. But for me, I'm going to go to the outside. I want to see a receiver, frankly, I want to see somebody go up against Josh Monton, Southern's top corner, and be able to win one-on-one against him. Now, I don't know how much State's going to do that because they're all big about we want to put our best receivers on the defense's worst. We're going to find the best matchup and take advantage of. But if I want to feel really good about this receiving core, I want to know that State's got a guy outside who, going up against a defense's top cover corner, they can still win. And I would love to see, in general, look, I want to see big plays in the receiving core. I want to see guys emerge there and, like, see who can be the go-to target. But I would really like to see somebody on the outside be able to go and win one-on-one consistently. That'd be a big thing for me because when you talk about this offense, having the ability to win one-on-one down the field, having the ability to hit those big plays in the passing game, you've got to have it. Like, that is a huge part of making this thing click. And having a dominant receiver, especially a guy on the outside, is one of the most important things you can have for an offense. That's something I definitely want to see. Go to the other side of the ball. What are you looking for from the State defense? What do you want to see in this matchup?
What I want to see for the defense. I want to see a lot, honestly, but I mean, if I had to pick, I guess, I mean, I just want to see good corner, good safety coverage. I just want to see that secondary play really good man coverage, like from the get go, and play it all game long. And you got to have those guys that play one on one matchups inside and out. I think the talent and the guys are there for Mississippi State to do that. I don't know too much as far as every guy that Southern Miss is going to have at receiver, but I'm sure they got a guy or two that you could point to and say, if we don't cover him, we're screwed. But I mean, you would hope that there's those get off the field on third down moments. Maybe you get a pick, knock the pass away, avoid penalties. I just want to see the secondary come to life.
Excuse me. Yeah, that is also a big one for me. I just talked about my concern with State at corner. I want to see them be able to lock down. And I have to get a sip of my drink here, Mal. Gotta love live podcasting.
Yeah.
No, I need to see that. I need to see State's corners hold up. Southern's receivers aren't the scariest, but they've got some guys who can be some big play receivers on the outside. And given that is a concern for State, how well are you going to be able to play coverage? That's big for me. I want to see – I mean, we're just kind of focusing on the trenches in the outside, but it's big. I want to see State dominate up front of the trenches. Like when Southern goes to run the football, I want them running into a brick wall from State's defensive line. When Southern goes back to throw, I want pass rush getting after Braylon Braxton and getting him to the ground. State needs to have the edge in the trenches. So at a minimum, if they can do that, I would feel better about this team going forward. That is the big thing I'm looking for out of this defense.
For sure.
What is a player on the State offense you're looking forward to have a big game? And we're not just going to talk about Blake Shapen here, but just sort of like a early, like, hey, I think this guy could have a big performance, or I want to see this guy have a big performance because it would be meaningful for what this team could be. Who's somebody you think could stand out?
I don't know if this is going to surprise you or not. I don't even know if I'm taking from you, but we've talked about the run game a lot. There's a couple different guys you could go with. I want to see if I gotta double check the depth chart, but I'm gonna throw him out there anyway. Devon Booth. I want to see them open up the run game and let him loose. I think the O line helps him, especially. He can have a really solid game. Like, I know that everyone wants to air it out nowadays in football, and you got to do that, but you got to, even with Fluff or whoever else, I think you got to be able to trust those running backs. But I think who stands out to me, especially, is going to be Booth.
I'll stick with the theme, going off of what I talked about, what I want to see. I mean, a guy I want to see perform. Well, I mean, I want to see Albert. I'll name a few guys. I want to see Albert Reese perform at left tackle. I want to see him have a big game. I want to see Brennan Thompson on the outside at receiver thrive. Now, in terms of a guy who I just think will have a big game, I think Booth is there. I think Bothwell's there. I do think the running backs are going to be in for a big game. But if you could tell me, like, I want a player to have come away with a huge stat line, I think Brennan Thompson outside of receiver is the guy I would love to see. On the other side of the ball, defensively, look, we know Isaac Smith is going to have a big day. And frankly, this might be a day he really racks up tackles because he's going to have a quarterback he has to deal with that can run in Braylon Braxton. But we'll say outside of Isaac Smith, what's a defensive player that you're either expecting to or hoping to see a big game from?
I'm gonna go with the transfer in Kedrick Bingley Jones. Used to be at North Carolina, highly recruited out of the 2020. Well, I don't know what class it was, but
He's not here last year. Played like 4 games, but was mostly hurt. So he's kind of a new face.
Let's say. Well, yeah. See, that's the thing. He was hurt last year, and you hope that if he stays healthy, I really think he could be a breakout star on the defensive line. I don't know if he's going to be the biggest guy on the defense, but I mean, it's possible. I mean, a big body up front like him could be a good, solid anchor to lead that defensive line. Can he break out and, like, you don't ask that they get sacks. I mean, you want to see that, but I just want to see him disrupt the run game in the backfield against Southern Miss, and I want to see him get quarterback pressure. Make him throw the ball away, make him have to run back or question his next move. Something, man. Get hyped up, get out there. I'm gonna go Kedrick Bingley.
I'm also going to stick up front, and I'm going to say Brandon Jennings at Jack linebacker. I talked about, pass rush is a big part of it. I mean, look, KBJ is a guy for sure. Him, along with some of those other defensive linemen, you want them to hold up and be able to have a big game. But I want that pressure off the edge. When State had 10 sacks as a team a year ago, that's not good enough. They have to be able to do a better job of generating pressure. Brandon Jennings is at the position where he's going to have a chance to get after the quarterback. I want to see him have a big game. Southern's got their questions up front along the offensive line. I don't want to see a Southern Miss offensive tackle being able to stop a Mississippi State edge rusher. I need a Mississippi State edge rusher to win consistently against a Southern Miss offensive tackle. So I'm wanting to see a big game out of Brandon Jennings, and I think he's going to have a chance to have a nice one.
All right.
I think it's full-on prediction time. We give our scores for week one. We still haven't fully set how we're going to do these shows going forward, if we're going to work in doing predictions for the whole season, although we do have another show later in the week. Maybe we can work in some predictions for that. But we do need to predict Mississippi State versus Southern Miss. Season opener, huge game. We talked about that at the jump. Huge implications for both teams. Bulldogs go down to Hattiesburg as a double-digit favorite, but not the favorite that they were when these things opened up. I think it's down to around 10 points when it opened at around 14. What are you thinking? Do the Bulldogs get a win, and by how much, if they do?
Yeah, I think they are going to get the win. And you mentioned it's probably double digit or whatever. Like, what'd you say was 10, 14?
I think
they're going to cover
spread's at around 10 and a half right now.
Dude, I got to cover that, man. I think they got to cover that. And I think they will. I'm not saying this is going to be like as if Alabama's playing Southern Miss or Georgia, obviously. I'll go ahead and throw my score out. I'm going to give State 31 points, and I say they give up 13 to Southern Miss. 31-13 is what I'll lock in. I think that Southern Miss is going to have some good offensive moments, but not enough. And I think Mississippi State's going to have some good offense too, but also I think there's going to be key playmakers, like I say, on defense. And just there's – you would love to win this opening game scoring 40 plus or 35 plus. I don't think they quite hit that here. But I'm comfortable with them hanging 31 on the board and only giving up a couple touchdowns maybe.
So that performance would be interesting. I think people would come away very excited for the defense. If you only missed the 13 points, you would have to be able to take that.
You also got to factor in, though. You also got to factor in how much do you trust Southern Miss's offense? And I know we talked about it a little bit tonight, but I mean, this isn't a team that's going to try to hang with you in a shootout completely, is it? I mean,
I think that's what they want to do. I think
that's what they want to do. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for sure. Are they going to be able to against Mississippi State? Look, if you hold Southern to 13, I think it's a great sign for State's defense. 31 points for the State offense could be some questions. I don't think people would be overly thrilled about that. Jay Xavier, 50-13 State.
50-13. I would love that. I would just love a 50-point, like a 50 burger for State, man. I'd love that.
That'd be great to have. 31 points offensively. I mean, you'd really like to see more than that. But I mean, I can kind of understand. I'm going to kind of go a little bit of a different direction here. Probably a similar outcome scoring wise in terms of differential, but I'm going to go 41-23 for State.
Okay, so you'll give
State offensively is going to be able to put points on the board. I do think State is going to be able to, at a minimum, I think they'll find success in the run game, but I do think Levy is always going to find a way to scheme up plays down the field. And I think this offense, if you get a four-quarter effort out of State offensively, and I do have those concerns about the offensive line. I don't know if we're going to see it in this game. So I think State's going to be able to do enough offensively to get a few touchdown drives, get a few more scoring drives on the board. And I think they'll put up a nice number offensively. For the State defense, though, I do have my questions about, just how improved are they going to be. I think there could be a little bit still of a learning curve there as well. And look, man, I think Southern's offense is going to be capable of scoring points. Like, they've got a good quarterback. They've got a good group of skill talent. I already mentioned, I think their receivers are talented, and State's corners are a question mark for me. They have receivers specifically who can win one-on-one vertical balls down the field. And I think they're going to throw a lot of that. Like, again, they're going to be running an offense very similar to Mississippi State. That's another factor here. I could see a higher scoring game just in the fact that I think these two teams are going to be pushing tempo, running a lot of plays. And I think you're probably going to get a few more scoring drives than maybe you would typically. So, I mean, I've got State winning this thing by 18 points. But at the same time, which, hey, that'd be a cover, and I think you would take that. But I do think
I got them at 18 as well. I think we have the same margin of victory, but I think our optimism for how much points they give up versus put up is it's a little
you feel better about the defense and not as good about the offense. I feel better about the offense, not as good about the defense.
Right. I think that's valid, like, because there's questions for Mississippi State all the way around this team. Like, we know that there's going to be players out there. The question is, are they going to be able to maintain that consistency and keep their spot on the starting role? And that's something that I would have questions about for the offense and the defense outside of Blake Shapen when he's healthy is the quarterback.
Yeah, and look, I think how fans would react to our two predictions. I already kind of talked about yours. Like, I think with your prediction, I don't know if there's going to be a takeaway other than I'm wondering about that offense. For mine, I think people would feel pretty good about offense. Defensively, people would have some concern. There could be an exception. If State were up 41-16, and then Southern got a late touchdown there, then I don't think people would care all that much. Like, that's a little.
That's what you gotta factor in, that late game stuff too. Like, what if you're up big and you rest your starters, and then the backups give you that little, hey, we'll let them in the end zone or hold them to an extra field goal or something, because you got to think of how the game's going to unfold for 4 quarters overall. Like, I don't expect. Just me personally, I don't expect the offense to be there for all 4 quarters. It could, but personally, I could see 3.5 maybe.
No, look, that's fair. I will say, though, I think this is an offense where you could have stretches where you could have a whole quarter where you're not producing and you could still put a nice number on the board. Because of the explosive play potential and the quick strike potential. But I think if State walks out of this thing, you're right, 41-23, but one of those touchdowns is late because you have to factor in how things are going to play out. I think you would take that, and you can understand, hey, defensively, they probably got some things they got to work on. Now, if we both take the negative side that we kind of had, and you said 31 points scored, I said 23 points allowed. If the final score is 31-23 Mississippi State, we got a lot of questions and a lot of concerns about Mississippi State football.
And you're like, you only won by 8, man. Come on.
Let me show this one. Weird.
50-13.
I hit the wrong one. Also, don't expect our defense to be complete lockdown for 4 quarters. That'll be busted assignments, in my opinion. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think,
of course,
this is one of those that can go both ways, and that I think Southern's going to have the ability, even against State's unit, to be able to hit some big plays and put some points on the board early. I also think if State gets a comfortable lead and puts their backups in, Southern will be able to get a few more scores. So that's where I have it being a little bit higher scoring. But again, I think State's offense. I talked about this earlier. Old Dominion scored 35 points a game running this offense against what is a better version of this defense. Like, I'm giving Mississippi State 6 more points. Maybe I'm lowballing, to be completely honest. But I will factor in that it's week 1 of the season. Things still have to play out. You've got Mississippi State 31-13. I've got State 41-23. Both comfortable wins. Both wins, though, that would come away with a little bit of a different reaction to where State's got some questions. If this thing is close, we're going to have some different reactions. If it's a complete blowout, even more so than either of us predicted, then we're also going to have some different reactions, which is why you will definitely want to be here after the game. I can't say right after the game. Well, it'll be a bit till I get the stream up, but we'll have some post game reaction to this game and break down whatever happens for State against Southern Miss. We're both predicting wins for the Bulldogs.
Is this game too? Is this one on Saturday? I know who they're playing. I just want to know when they're playing.
Yeah, Saturday at 11 a.m. on
11
ESPN. 11 a.m. Central.
Oh, I'll be at work anyway, but either way, because I work till 5:30 Eastern, get off, I'll come home. On Ballard Sports Media, though, we plan to go live for that LSU Clemson game. That'll be a good one. But I just wanted to know just in case, because if I could have, I would have joined you for the post game. But maybe that's something you could roll with. And we'll always be here on Mondays and sometimes Thursday or whatever.
Yeah, you'll have me after the game for post game reaction for whatever happens. Look, it's a game. Mississippi State though needs to get off the season on the right foot. They need to have a nice performance here. Anything other than a comfortable win, there's going to be a lot of question marks about this team going forward. And God forbid if it's a loss, y'all are not going to get a fun version of Andrew in the post game. So
I probably won't be able to talk if they lose. I'll let you do all the talking next week.
Yeah, we'll see how it works out. We hope it's certainly a big win for Mississippi State. We will have a post-game show, but we're going to have another show before that. Thursday night, haven't set a time yet, but we are going to have another podcast on Thursday night, and we are toying with the idea of it trying to be a call-in show. We think that'd be a lot of fun to get some people in here and give their thoughts and be able to talk a little bit about the Bulldogs. Obviously, we're getting some nice interaction. We love having you guys that are a part of the show throughout as we go and leaving the comments. It's great. Got a chance for y'all to be able to interact a little bit more and get your thoughts, get your predictions for the Bulldogs. We'll try to come up with some fun stuff to do for that show. We'll be back on Thursday in the evening time again. Time not fully set yet, but then we will also be back on Saturday sometime in the post game to react to whatever happens when Mississippi State takes on Southern Miss. Week 1 of the college football season is here. It is about to be a really busy but exciting time. A big season for the Bulldogs getting ready to get underway. Year 2 for Jeff Levy. And we're looking forward to having a really fun time going forward, breaking things down. Good night to you as well, Jay. Thanks for all your interactions throughout. We really appreciate it. Be sure, subscribe to the channel. If you could share, we'd appreciate that as well. And, hey, make sure you put on that bell notification so you know whenever we go live that you guys can hop in and be a part of the show. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks for Christian for being here as well. And we will see you guys next time.
See y'all.